Hello, I'm Pronago, and today I'm going to teach you everything you need to know to start working on a Brood War single player map or campaign right now. Well, maybe not single player, it can be any map actually. And I'm going to tell you guys a little bit of a primer before we get into it. If you guys don't know who I am, I have worked within Brood War since I was 4 years old. I started working with, playing the game, working in the map editor. Obviously, nothing I ever made back then was very much to hoot about. But the point of me telling you guys that I started at 4 years old is to talk about the fact that we all start somewhere with our creative ventures. And right now, where there's so many tutorials and there's so much content to explore, and there's so many people who are interested in showcasing your creations, there really has never been a better time, in my opinion, to start working on a Brood War project than right now. I mean, Remastered is out if you want to, have your project have some modding or little to no modding. There's 1.16.1, which is the the latest stable the latest stable moddable version of the game that is available, which is if you want to have a lot more modding and you want to have like custom tile sets and graphics and stuff. And of course, there's people like Jay Briano plays, Deltron Live, myself, and a couple other people like DK. There's plenty of people who play these campaigns and these maps and showcase them to an audience and give you valuable feedback to learn from. And if it's a passion that you want to explore, even if you just want to give it a try and see if you like it, I guarantee you a lot of people who don't actively work within the editor and don't experiment and don't actually see if they could be good at it or that it's something that they could enjoy, a lot of them don't they don't ever do that. And if they did, they'd probably find a hobby or a passion that they didn't really know that they had. So I'm encouraging people, hopefully with these tutorials, the goal is to get people who currently don't make anything to start making stuff. And maybe if you start practicing now, the next time we have a Mapcraft contest, you might be able to submit something for one of those games. So stay subscribed, or if you haven't already subscribed, subscribe now and be on the lookout for more of these videos. But let's get right into it now. I think I've done enough of the preamble. So what are you going to need to do to start working on StarCraft content? Now, optionally, you can start this off by clicking the first link in the description of the video, which is actually a download link to StarCraft version 1.16.1. It is in RAR form. It's 1.2 gigs, so it's a pretty hefty download. And if you download this, you don't expect to be able to use Mega for much more in terms of download, like bandwidth. They limit you if you have a free account. You'll have to wait until like another day before you use Mega again or something like that. I don't remember exactly how it works, but I highly recommend that you at least have this this RAR file extracted to somewhere at a higher root directory than your StarCraft Remastered installation, if you do own Remastered, or if you have the free version of the game installed, even if you don't actually own the skin pack portion of Remastered. I highly recommend you have this installed so that you can play some of the older campaigns and total conversions and stuff that require this old version of the game. And in general, in case you decide that you want to make content for this version and not for Remastered, it's obviously good to have this version. So highly recommend that you get this, but you don't absolutely have to. There's not really any installation instructions. You just download it and you unpack it from the RAR into some folder somewhere, and it should work right out of that box, quote unquote. So up next, let's go ahead and grab SCM Draft 2, which is a map editor made by a fellow named Suicidal Insanity. Now, don't let the name fool you. He's quite the stable and happy chap from what I've interacted with him. You can forget about these drop-down menus. You can just click this jump to the download list button, and it will take you to the most recent available builds. Now, since it is still actively being worked on, recently SI came out of hiding when Remastered was announced and started updating SCM Draft. You can either choose to go for an older version from before Remastered came along. It'll still be compatible with Remastered. Or you can decide to take one of the more cutting-edge versions, which may have some irregularities, as the URL may indicate. Some potential like bugs or pitfalls. I believe he will be shipping an update relatively soon to from the upload date of this video, so don't be surprised if when you look at this on your own browser, the dates are out of whack or there's a couple new versions. I mean, the guy's working on the editor actively, so that's sort of what you would expect. But needless to say, I think the most recent version is more or less stable. There's like an issue with displaying turrets on Goliaths and on siege tanks where they'll be the wrong color or they might be like displaced down a few pixels or something, but nothing that you can't deal with. So I'm going to go ahead and download this just to demonstrate it. Now, once you unpack this, and you really just need to unpack it into a folder somewhere, it can be on your desktop, it can be anywhere. We can go ahead and minimize that Chrome tab there and refresh our desktop so we can see the folder. And you can read these readmes or the syntax. This is just for if you were using the text trigger editor, which would basically allow you to copy and paste triggers in a similar like sort of manner as you would code stuff in Notepad++ or Visual Studio if you're familiar with coding, but it's totally optional. There is a default trigger editor available. Now, when you start up SCM Draft, it may ask you to define your StarCraft installation path. All you have to do here is find where it says StarCraft path. I think it pops up for you and asks you. You just navigate to wherever your StarCraft path is installed. Now, this will accept remastered directories, patch 1.2, and it'll also accept 1.16.1, and presumably any patch earlier than that if you wanted to go back further. But I'm not 100% sure. I've only used those two particular patches. So you just navigate to it. You select the folder. Like if we were installed on desktop, we would select desktop and hit OK. And then I'm not going to save these settings because obviously that's incorrect, but then you would hit apply, save, and launch the editor. Now, since I already have this installed, if I launched it right now, it'd probably throw an error. But when I say installed, it just means that I have another folder with it somewhere. But typically, once you launch the program itself, you should see a screen that's something like this. Yours will not have all of these extraneous profiles. Yours will just have default. And that's fine. You don't need to do any edits once you define your StarCraft path, so go ahead and hit OK. Now, when you first launch the editor, this is what you should see, and it might look a little bit different. There might be some stuff down here. One particularly annoying default setting that SCM Draft has is that it will always display the unit deaths. It'll always animate them, which is good for actually testing out iScript animations if you're modding, but not really useful for much else. And then in options, sound is enabled. I highly recommend you turn that off, or if you load a map with siege tanks in, God forbid, your ears will be bleeding and your eyes will be bleeding when you inevitably delete them and they explode. So I highly recommend you turn those two options off in particular. And then there will also be a default grid, which you can disable by holding Alt-G or just going to options, grid, disabled. But I'll get into specific SCM Draft functionalities in a later video. That'll probably be the next video, actually, is just explaining some of the features of SCM Draft, how you would want to customize a brand new profile, how I do it anyways, and what you can do to set yourself up for success in SCM Draft. Don't be alarmed at the overabundance of options and how confusing some of the layout looks. You can hide some of this stuff by just clicking these buttons here, and I highly recommend that you do so if you find yourself being overwhelmed. You just take away some of that stimuli and get yourself back to something that looks a little bit more like what you might be familiar with if you've used StarEdit before and you haven't used SCM Draft, or you used an earlier version that didn't have all of these bells and whistles. Just to make sure that we have our map editor working, we can just go ahead and hit the new dialog, which is up in the top left, and then just click like create a random map, whatever it defaults to, and you should see that we are in the Badlands tile set. We should be able to paint like high dirt, grass, low grass, water, whatever the case may be. We should be able to go into the units on the bottom left here, place a medic, Goliath, whatever the case may be, and we should be able to go into any of these dialogue options and change stuff around. So again, I will be doing a bit of a demo later on in a separate video for different SCM Draft functionalities, but I highly recommend that you experiment in the meantime. Just familiarizing yourself with the editor a little bit. And a good way to do this is actually going to go hand in hand with our next and final step for this tutorial, which is going to be to download a modding suite. And it's not for the purpose of actually modding, but actually just accessing some resources that you can use to learn. And I'm going to make it as simple as possible, hopefully. So let's go back to our browser here and navigate to the third link in the description of this video. It'll take you to my thread on startit.net, which is a forum for Brood War custom content and discussion. Feel free to register an account while you're here if you're interested in contributing. The thread is called Many Manly Man-Made Modern Modding Programs. I couldn't find an M word for programs. Maybe somebody has an idea. But ultimately, you just want to come over here, ignore all the fluff, click Python Modding Suite. It's a drop-down menu. Yours will probably look a little bit more green than mine if you navigate here and you don't have an account, because I have a specific theme set, but it should still function the same. You just click on Python Modding Suite. I've got a little blurb here written out, but all you need to do is follow these steps down here. There's 3 steps to installing this program. All you have to do is decide, okay, am I a 32-bit user or a 64-bit user? And if you don't know the answer to this question, just Google, how do I tell if my computer is 32-bit or whatever, and you'll find your answer. I think it's like going into your system settings. This does also work on Mac. If you are a Mac user, I don't have any idea what you would do to install Python on it, but presumably it's a little bit more straightforward than installing it on Windows. So I would just Google install Python 2.7.12, which is the version of Python that, at least for me, works fine with this particular modding suite. So I would find a way to install that on Mac. Make sure that you also get a Python imaging library, or I think there's also Pillow, which might be a different program that is like an alternative. But I'm overcomplicating it for like the one guy out there who uses Mac who might actually accidentally click on this video. For everybody else who uses a real computer, go ahead and decide, based on your operating system, you are either installing the 32-bit links or the 64-bit links. Don't mix and match. And once you've gotten the Python 2.7.12 installed and the imaging library installed, then you can click on this third link here to download the Python modding suite by clicking this clone or download green button and hitting download zip. This will give you a PYMS master folder, which we can then extract to our desktop and freak out our computer. And once we're done freaking out our computer, we can open up this, and if you did everything right, you should be able to launch the PYMPQ or PyMPQ file. And it'll look like this when it's launched. So don't worry if all of this stuff seems really foreign. We're not going to be in this program for very long, but feel free to experiment with stuff. The main idea behind the MPQ program is to view MPQ files, add files to them, extract files to them, and basically the MPQ file is like this big data collector that it's almost like a CD or something. It holds data that the game reads, and in order to find some of the files that are hidden from us by default but still accessible in the game, like Blizzard's campaign missions, you need to use a program like PyMPQ so you can open up those data storages. In Remastered, they use MPQs mixed with this thing called Cask, which is a different sort of data collector or data holder or whatever, file structuring system. You don't really need to worry about that, though. There should still be MPQ files in your installation, even if you use patch 1.20. So go ahead and navigate to your StarCraft installation, be it 1.16.1 or 1.20, and find the starcraft.mpq file. What you'll see once you put this through is a bunch of files that say campaign. You're going to click on the first one, scroll all the way down until you find the last one. Hold shift so that you can multi-select and left click that last one there. And this will allow you to extract every single campaign related file. So it's all of the maps and all of the voice acting and other sound effects that they imported, which are denoted by WAV files, where the maps are CHKs. Go ahead and extract them by clicking that extract files here button. and extract them wherever. I'm going to put them on my desktop. Just for completion's sake, we can also go ahead and once it's done, open up the Brood War MPQ and do the same thing, because the Brood War MPQ holds the Brood War maps, whereas the StarCraft MPQ holds the vanilla ones. So we definitely want to go ahead and scroll down here and find the last folder, just the same steps we did before, and go ahead and extract to desktop. So eventually this will be done. We should be able to go ahead and close out of it when it is. It's going to take its time. And in the meanwhile, we can go ahead and navigate to that folder that it created. It'll create a similar file structure to what you were seeing in the PyMPQ window. So when it saw like it was the file structure was like campaign, Protoss L1, scenario started or something like that. So it follows the same sort of file structure. You don't really need to worry about how any of that works right now. The important thing is that if you have SCM Draft installed correctly, you should be able to just double click on the CHK file. If not, sometimes this happens anyways, even if you do install it correctly, you should be able to double click on it and then select SCM Draft 2 from a list of programs in your computer or manually point to it. And that should establish the file association so that you won't have to do that again afterwards. So just go ahead and use the default profile, and you're going to look at something like this. This is the first Protoss mission from vanilla. Everybody remembers it. It was the mission where you start out with some units down here in the bottom right. You went over to see Phoenix, and yada, yada, yada. Everybody knows the end of that story. So this is more or less a very easy way for you to look at what Blizzard did with their maps. You can go to the up here in the layer, you can select locations. It's also Control L for short. I'll get into this when I talk about my absolute beginner tutorial on SCM Draft itself. But you can, look at locations, you can look at the triggers, you can look at the forces and the map description and everything else. So basically, you can take a look at how Blizzard did their own stuff, and this is basically a guide on how to do that. So hopefully this helps you out. I highly recommend that you explore the idea of like opening up your favorite vanilla or Brood War map and making some changes to it to see if you can improve the map or make it so that it feels different even. It doesn't even have to be like a net improvement. If it's something new, maybe that is the improvement it needs. So I definitely recommend you take a look at something in the Blizzard campaigns and try and manipulate it, emulate it, learn from it. It is a very dated production. It's not the most, crazy good project. Obviously, there have been plenty of campaigns since the game has come out that have been better in terms of like gameplay or even, I would argue, story. But from a beginner's standpoint, it's basically the best resource you have. So you can look at the Terran campaign. It's incredibly basic for the first couple of levels. We can go and take a look at that. So Terran, for example, if we want to open up the second Terran mission, we can do that, and we can see it's a very small map. So I think it's 64 by 64. You got Raynor down here. He has a serious butt line and all that stuff. So yeah, you can just take a look at how they triggered all this stuff out and see if you want to try and change some stuff or whatever the case may be. I highly recommend you open up these maps and mess about with them for yourselves. For any other questions you may have or any problems you come into contact with while following the steps of this tutorial, please let me know in the comments below, and I will do my best to help you out. And of course, obviously, you can stay tuned for more tutorials that are like this that will hopefully give you a bit more understanding of what SCM Draft offers. But in the meanwhile, again, look at how Blizzard did their maps, look at how other members of the community messed around with their maps and their campaigns. Figure out, maybe you have a favorite map that you play on BattleNet a lot. If it's not protected and you can open it up in SCM Draft, open it up and see what you can find, see what they did with their triggers. Try and learn from somebody else and spend a lot of time playing StarCraft 1 content so that you can get a feel for what you like as a player and try and emulate that when you're creating stuff, or maybe something that you assume might be fun and enjoyable. Try and see if you can produce that, and maybe an idea you've had for the next best, greatest campaign, but nobody's ever made it yet. Maybe it's time for you to do that. You know what I'm saying? So again, I hope you guys found this tutorial enlightening and useful. And I will be sure to continue to produce these as time goes on. So stay subscribed, and hopefully we'll get some more exciting young map makers ready to start their careers, if you can call it that. All right, my name's Pronago. I will be seeing you guys in the next video. Thanks so much for watching, and good luck.